The 3DS, just like my self-esteem, is dead! One of the best Nintendo systems and is home to some of the best games in Nintendo's wide catalog. The Legend of Zelda: Link Between Worlds, Metroid: Samus Returns, Animal Crossing New Leaf. That, when you look back at its life, there's just so many things that the 3DS did right. Unlike me, it's responsible for pushing a lot of Nintendo's core series to new grounds, making innovative new gameplay, and rehashing. I've gotta say that the 3DS is slowly becoming one of Nintendo's most memorable consoles, and as time goes on, I think people are gonna look at the 3DS more fondly. And that's thanks to it having that old Nintendo charm of the DS and Wii era, and pushing it to a modern front. This isn't to say that the 3DS isn't flawed. I mean, any system that can't play Lost in Blue pretty much is. But the 3DS has a soft spot somewhere in my cold heart. Right next to taxes. There's just something about the 3DS library and it having such a big variety in games that makes it very charming to think about. Thanks to the 3DS, we saw a revival of Kid Icarus, with Kid Icarus Uprising being the first game in his Dead series in nearly 20 years. We have the 3DS to thank and curse for reviving and popularizing the Fire Emblem series, with Fire Emblem Awakening being a big success. You know, I have no comment on this game. The Pokemon series saw its first mainline 3D game with X and Y, and Nintendo tried to kill us 3 more times. Really? Looking back at it, the 3DS pushed a lot of Nintendo series forward, and I'd argue that it's more important than a lot of people give it credit for in that regard. But what do we do now? It's dead! The final years of a console's life can be some of its most exciting times as a gamer and fan. Oftentimes, when a video game console is on its last legs, there's normally 2 options that a game company would try to do. They either end it off with a big bang, sort of as a thank you to fans, or they may take a more simpler, quieter approach to a system dying, not really release anything special, kinda as a way to show gamers that, hey, this console is dead, it's time to move on, and buy the next one. I think both approaches are appropriate. Sometimes ending things off with a bang is the best way to handle a console's life. And sometimes heading out quietly is more suitable for when people are just ready to leave. That's just like when I leave out of parties early. If I ever been to one before. Or was ever invited to one. Those final years of a console's life can be some of its most interesting moments in a console's lifetime. You're not really sure what to expect, whether a game company plans on extending the life of its console or just outright leaving it up and dry. Take the Wii U for example. It was pretty much on its deathbed once it came out, but by the end of its life cycle, it was able to cap everything off with some of the best games in its library, along with some pretty interesting titles on the Virtual Console. It's the end of an old generation and the start of a new. Time to put that old console away and take out the new one. Although, Nintendo does sometimes try to act as if multiple consoles can coexist all at one time. Like when the Game Boy Advance came out in 2001, the Nintendo DS came out only 3 years later in 2004. It kinda did exist at the same time, except you know, the DS was pretty much gonna overtake the Game Boy Advance soon enough. The DS even had a slot for GBA games on the system. Listen to this, when a new console plays its older gen games, it's like the Game Boy equivalent of being eligible for Social Security. While the 3DS came in with an unsteady launch, it managed to make its presence known in a quick amount of time. Okay, not quick enough, but it happened. You gotta treat the 3DS with kid gloves. Hey, it may not have looked all too hot on release, but in time, it started to get its footing. It's important to remember that the 3DS, in my opinion, showed Nintendo at its most persistent. You could tell that they really wanted to make this console work, because they had no other choice. And on top of that, they had people to impress, gamers and investors. But mostly investors. I remember being around when the 3DS was originally announced, and at first, it didn't really set the world on fire. This did. This was mainly because of the gimmick of the console. Playing games in 3D, it's a cool concept at first, but it wasn't really something that I think gamers and casual audiences really cared about at this time. And this is during the period of 3D movies and television sets becoming a part of the mainstream. And those failed. The 3DS came on the scene to overtake the current position of the aging DS, and I think this was about the right time. The DS came out in 2004, and by 2011, you could tell it was starting to show its age faster than this random banana. It's time to put old grandpa in the home and leave him there. Oh, just buy the 3DS. Once the 3DS really settled in with a decent price cut and an ambassador program and a slate of games like Animal Crossing New Leaf and Pokemon X and Y, the 3DS really started to take off, and once it did, it never looked back. I think that price cut really did help the 3DS reach a larger audience and beat out its competition with the PS Vita, which was dead on arrival. Couple that with some stellar revisions like the 3DS XL and the new 3DS, and you have yourself a home run. And there was even the 2DS, which I have right here. Yes, I'm a loser. I know it. This was meant as a console for smaller children. Think of it as a baby's first console, like a leapfrog that can play Resident Evil. It's also more easier on kids' eyes. You don't want your child to have eyesight problems from playing so many 3D games. So then why do I have it? It's because I'm cheap. While having some troubles in the beginning, the end of the 3DS life is where it gets a bit more interesting. By 2016, the 3DS was starting to wind down. Rumors of a Nintendo hybrid console, the NX, were starting to rise. It was looking as if the Wii U and the 3DS era of Nintendo was coming to a close and that the NX was going to replace them. And this generation ending was pretty weird. With the Wii U having a premature death and the 3DS hanging on to dear life, you could tell that by this time, Nintendo was slowly starting to distance itself from the 3DS, just like what my family does to me. This is sort of par for the course for Nintendo. They have a pattern of slowly letting their consoles die out with a couple of games being released thereafter. And 2016 was a stellar year for the system. I mean, are you kidding me? They released this new version of the 3DS. I hate myself. I think Nintendo was really looking to sell off the rest of the 3DS inventory that they had, as they knew it was going to be discontinued pretty soon, and they can make a quick buck with just putting on a new design on the system. Nintendo fans would buy anything. No, really, we will! From 2016 up until 2018, there was just a bunch of different 3DS variations being released exclusively to Walmart and Amazon, or released on Black Friday at certain stores. And I'm actually all for it. This generation really showed Nintendo making the most out of their branding. You gotta keep in mind that before this, Nintendo wasn't really known for their special edition systems outside of a couple important releases here and there. And the special edition systems we did get were... yeah, these made the 3DS feel a bit more personable as you could customize it as you wanted to with their swappable cover plates and all. You just wouldn't catch me in public with them. People already know that I'm a loser. I can't be a loser and a Nintendo fan in public. 2016, the year my life started to go downhill, and the year that Mario & Luigi Paper Jam was released. Those two have nothing to do with each other, but it's odd how they both came at the same time. 2016 was a decently strong year for the 3DS, evident by the March and September Nintendo Directs for that year. Even though I'm sure all resources were aimed at the NX for the next console generation, 3DS fans weren't let out to dry, especially with the release of Pokemon Sun and Moon announced in February of that year. Anytime a second mainline Pokemon game is released on a handheld, this usually means that the console's end is near. You can think of it as one last hurrah before everyone jumps ships to the next console. It's that one last heartbeat before the 3DS kicks the bucket. But the 3DS just couldn't die. It was revealed in the March Direct that Super Mario Maker would also be released on the 3DS later in the year. You know, just because you can do it, doesn't mean you have to. This version was stripped down. It was lacking features that the home console version had, but this release made perfect sense to me at the time, considering that the 3DS had a bigger install base than the Wii U, and this was in an era where Nintendo was getting a lot of their home console games and porting them over to the 3DS, and it made sense, as they often sold just as good and sometimes even better than their home console counterparts. Have you seen the sales for Smash Bros. For Wii U and Smash Bros. For 3DS? Yeah. I'm getting secondhand embarrassment. This probably speaks for why in the March Direct for that year, gamers were surprised with the reveal of Hyrule Warriors Legends, a portable version of Hyrule Warriors, which ran like garbage. Granted, it did play a bit better on the new Nintendo 3DS, but they must have had real high hopes that people would look past the low frame rates and also look past the game, because this game pretty much turned your 3DS into a portable toaster. You could tell that throughout 2016, the 3DS was still a popular system that Nintendo and other developers geared all their focus on, with there being the release of Mario and Sonic at the Rio 2016 Olympic Games. And this actually released before the Wii U version, so if you want to torture yourself months ahead of time, go ahead, do it! Game Freak released a digital game called Pocket Card Jockey in 2016. I didn't say it was a good year. And we also got the release of Disney Art Academy. Again, I didn't say it was a good year. Normally when a console's on its way out, there's a factory full of third-party developers turning out a bunch of small budget throwaway games, be it media tie-ins or long-running series like FIFA or Just Dance. But the middle of 2016 is when RPGs were in full force for the 3DS, with Fire Emblem Fates, Bravely Second Endlayer, and Dragon Quest VII all getting announced for later that year. And I think having these games released on the 3DS during its last stages of death showed fans that hey, the 3DS might be heading out soon, but it still has some gas left in its tank. It's only enough to go down the street, but there's still gas in the car. But Nintendo was sure to keep fans satisfied with the announcement of a new Metroid Prime game, except it's Federation Force. This was the game equivalent of being waken up on Christmas Day and being put into a coma. I can't tell you how upset people were at this announcement. For years, Metroid fans were clamoring for a new Metroid Prime game, especially after the bad taste that Metroid Other M left in a lot of people's mouths. And so Nintendo decided to give them Poison instead. I think deep down, Nintendo knew this wasn't going to be a big seller or a talk of the town type of game. Well, it was the talk of the town, alright, but more like that weird neighbor down the street that never comes outside. So basically me. So to soften the blow, there was the release of Kirby Planet Robobot, a formidable game in the series that kinda took the Kirby franchise to new heights in terms of gameplay mechanics. It was a solid title, and a good appetizer for Kirby fans. Meanwhile, Metroid fans got the stomach virus. By the end of 2016, Nintendo had themselves a decent year, filled with Pokemon, Kirby, and a forgettable Metroid game. But it begs the question, what does Nintendo do for the next year? The 3DS is one step closer to its death, and there's no NX. I'm getting impatient. Well, at least for 3 more months, because in March of 2017, Nintendo ushered in a new era of gaming, with the Nintendo Switch finally being released. A console, I think, reinvented Nintendo and pushed blood into Nintendo's decrepit body. But as the Switch came out, there was a solid concern for the 3DS family, and questions of how long the console would be around, or if it could coexist, if at all, with Nintendo's newest line of consoles. But who cares? We finally got a new Pikmin game on the 3DS. Why does Nintendo hate me? Starting off the top of 2017, Nintendo now had 2 consoles to focus on, and you could tell support for the 3DS was beginning to decrease a small bit. Nintendo announced Hey Pikmin as a tax write-off. We also got the announcement for Monster Hunter Stories, a fun RPG side game set in the Monster Hunter universe, and Miitopia. I don't know what you expect me to say. Along with Bye Bye Box Boy and some more content for Fire Emblem Echoes. It also happened to be the 25th anniversary for Kirby, and with that in mind, there was the announcement of 2 new Kirby games. Albeit small titles that you could play in bite-sized sessions, not really meaty experiences that you could sink your teeth into. But with there being 2 consoles out at the same time, Nintendo seemed to really split up their directs into 2 sections. There was a 3DS section, and then there was a Switch section. But with there being 2 different directions of Nintendo now, you could slowly begin to see the new direction of Nintendo and their way of showing off games. The 3DS games will be placed in the top half of the direct, just as a way to get them out of the way first, with there being a heavier focus on Switch content. The beginning of 2017 showed the future of the 3DS being pretty bright, if not a bit more dimmer than 2016. By mid-year, the 3DS began to pick up some steam, and the September 2017 Direct was insanely stacked, and I like to see this year, and a bit of 2018, as the final victory lap for the 3DS. We have the announcement of Pokemon Ultra Sun and Ultra Moon setting the world on fire. And by world, I mean the social lives of Pokemon fans, which is already non-existent. There was a remaster of the Game Boy Advance game, Mario & Luigi Superstar Saga, which was set for a 2017 release, and Kirby Battle Royale, a fun little multiplayer Kirby game. We also got Mario Party The Top 100, which is slated for a November release. And Nintendo found a new way to give people third-degree burns, with Fire Emblem Warriors releasing with a system. But easily, the most exciting reveal was Metroid Samus Returns being announced, a return to form for the Metroid series and one of the best games in the franchise since Prime 3. I was absolutely ecstatic for this release. I haven't been this happy since my 8th birthday. Since Federation Force, it seemed like Nintendo relegated Metroid to a lower tier franchise, but seeing it back in the spotlight gave me a bit of hope for its future. Company Atlas also came in and ported a bunch of classic RPGs over to the system, and I'm always in support of companies making their games as accessible as possible to gamers. And at the same time, we also got a port of Minecraft. Hey, if they could port this game to every microwave in America, they would. Nintendo also started pushing out as many 3DS variants as they could, as these final years were prime time for a final big push for the system. 2018 finally came, and this is definitely when the 3DS was out the door, but still had 1 foot in and 1 foot out. The March 2018 Direct for this year basically proved this point. You could tell that the 3DS presence was getting much lighter than the previous year. There were some pretty cool announcements for this year's Direct. There was WarioWare Gold, a fantastic collection of mini games from previous WarioWare games, along with Detective Pikachu, Luigi's Mansion, and Dylan Dead Heatbreakers. And while these games are fine and all, you could definitely tell that Nintendo was scraping the bottom of the barrel. I mean, when you're breaking out WarioWare and Dylan from the grave, that means that we're just getting the scraps. Amazing games, but these are definitely snacks, not full course meals. But probably the most telling game that shows the demise of the 3DS was a remake of Mario & Luigi's Bowser's Inside Story. If the other games were scraping the bottom of the barrel, and this is like putting the barrel over your head and waiting for something to fall out. In my personal opinion, this remake was totally unnecessary. Not only was it coming out a year after the previous remake of Superstar Saga, but no one was really asking for this. And after the bad reputation of Mario & Luigi Paper Jam, I think the best move would have been to make a wholly new game from scratch. And I wasn't the only person to carry this sentiment, millions of people did. And this is because no one bought the game. While an amazing game, no less, it was released on a console that was on its way out with a fledgling audience. This ultimately led to it being one of the worst selling Mario games in history. This definitely didn't help the developer's Alpha Dream, who because of mismanagement and growing debt, eventually declared bankruptcy and is now closed. It's kinda crazy to see how this misstep led to the downfall of a beloved series. Maybe if it was released on a newer console, it would have had a better fate. But who has time for theories? Kirby's Extra Epic Yarn is being released in 2019. You probably can't hear it, but I'm crying. By 2019, the 3DS was fully out the door and out of sight. Sure, there were small third-party games being released, and the eShop was still open, but it will only take a year for the 3DS to stop production. There isn't a single 3DS game being shown off in any of the 2019 Directs and beyond. We went from there being a couple of 3DS games being presented in a Nintendo Direct to it being completely absent. So yeah, Nintendo and coexisting isn't a thing. It's like trying to coexist a gym with McDonald's. Now, with the 3DS being dropped out of support, this is when people start to take advantage of the leftover audience and the niche community is left behind. Just because the system lost support doesn't mean the games won't be produced for it. There's still people making NES games to this day. You've got games like Frankenstory and Angel Do Nots being released years after the system has been discontinued. And I think we all know why. These games are getting much more attention releasing at the end of the system's life than it would if it were being dropped while the system was still active. And I can't really fault any developers for doing this. It's a smart way of getting your name out there and making a big impression on people. With the 3DS eventually shutting down its eShop, Nintendo discontinuing different services, and manufacturing of its console, it basically spells the end of the 3DS family line. It's pretty sad to see a console like this go away. The 3DS was responsible for keeping Nintendo afloat during some of its most roughest times. It's also responsible for the revival of some of Nintendo's most biggest core series. It was that good old reliable friend that you could always count on. With an incredible library of games and surprising longevity, I think the 3DS left its mark on Nintendo and gamers for a very long time. While the 3DS is going away, it still sells very well for a console that many consider dead. From time to time, I still catch people using their 3DS out in public, and there's still a very active fan base for the 3DS. It just goes to show you that the 3DS, although it's gone, having a good community of passionate fans is making it live on forever. Looking back at it now, I just miss the 3DS so much. I miss it so much, in fact, I'm gonna sing a song about it right now.